Hi friends, and welcome to Collecting Elton. In this, the first installment of a new sub-series I call Fantastic Voyages, I take you on a video field trip to Abbey Road Studios. Not the interior, I'm afraid, just the exterior. Plus the crosswalk, made famous of course by the Beatles. And to pick up on the subject of my last video, Abbey Road was the studio where the short-lived Bread and Beer Band recorded their still-unreleased album in late 1968, and where, in the years after, elements of several Elton John albums were also recorded. So if you haven't watched my previous video, Collecting Elton episode 37 about the Devil's Gallop 45, I strongly encourage you to watch that. Anyway, I want to warn you first that I shot this footage in the summer of 2015, and I didn't have a gimbal then. This is not St. John's Wood here, by the way. I think this is Charing Cross, just down from Leicester Square. And I shot a lot of my London video footage for reasons kind of too complicated to explain here, but to put it simply, this footage was intended for only a few people to see and see only once. So I didn't care as much as I would now that the camera was shaking all over the place. Anyway, after stabilizing the heck out of it, I've salvaged about maybe 5 minutes of usable Abbey Road footage. And what you'll see is a representation of what it's like for someone to leave the train at St. John's Wood Station and walk from the station to the studios on Abbey Road. And although I don't want to make this a long video, after I finish with the Abbey Road footage, towards the end I'll also share some of the photos I took that same summer of Elton-related sites around London. I'll explain what those are and do some now versus then comparisons using images from the Capt Fantastic booklets. So here we are inside St. John's Wood Station on the platform. St. John's Wood Station is in Westminster, in northwest London, and the station dates to, I think, just before the Second World War. Its main street-level entrance at the corner at Finchley Road has a kind of depression modern thing about it I've always liked, and what's a common building style in the 1930s. We're about to head up the escalator here. This escalator tube reminds me a lot of the one at King's Cross for some reason. I don't know why King's Cross specifically. Most central London tube stations of this vintage, while the substation platforms, many of which in central London were completed in the 1930s, along with the various connections to the surface, their main escalator tubes pretty much all look like this. London's my favorite city in the world, by the way. New York, great town, been there several times. I've had many great times there, but it's too much for me, and I always found the record stores there very disappointing, at least for someone of my musical taste. London, on the other hand, has such a great vibe to it. I've always found it very laid back, and even though many of the record stores I visited in my summers there have since closed, London has, or at least had, some of the best record stores that I've ever seen. I didn't get a lot of Elton stuff in those days, strangely enough, but pretty much all my Kylie Minogue collection I bought over there in London. In London and in Louisville, Kentucky, of all places. Those two were my Kylie places. So we're leaving the station here, heading towards Grove End Road, which runs westbound, southwest, and will take us to the Abbey Road crosswalk. And besides the Bread and Beer Band project of 1968, what were some of Elton's other connections to Abbey Road Studios? Well, this is just off the top of my head, so I don't think this will be a complete list. But Abbey Road was where, in 1976, for the Blue Moves album, the London Symphony Orchestra performed the overture to Elton's Tonight, as arranged by James Newton Howard. And then, a few years later, in 1980, again, the London Symphony Orchestra recorded, here at Abbey Road, their contribution to Elton's Carla Etude, also as arranged by the ever-brilliant James Newton Howard, but in that case it was for the Fox album. And of all the things Elton's ever created, Carla Etude is my absolute favorite. What else? Well, in 2016 and later, until about 2022, the lacquers for many of Elton's vinyl reissues, most of those released on Mercury, were cut at Abbey Road's mastering facilities, and that is such an excellent sounding series of vinyl reissues, it really is. And here's the famous crosswalk. I'm not a Beatles historian. I can't tell you on what day they did the photo sessions here. I'll assume it was summer of 1969 because they released the Abbey Road album that fall, and clearly it was a sunny summer's day when those photos were taken. Since then, trees and shrubs have either grown larger or disappeared. Other than that, not much has changed. On one of my visits here, some Beatles fan explained to me that the crosswalk stripes were moved a few feet more south at some point in the 1980s or 90s. Is that true? I don't know. Everything looks to be about in the same place as it was in 1969. And there's the front door. Probably the most famous front door of a recording studio anywhere. So many greats of music, from classical to classic rock, have walked through that front door. It's really something to see in person. Just standing right there seeing it is really cool. And the fence that separates the sidewalk from the studio's entrance has this concrete base, and although I doubt the studio or even the City of London actively encourages it, people mark their visits by writing on the concrete. In 2014, the summer before I shot this video, I wrote the names of several of my aunts and uncles on my father's side because they've always been huge Beatles fans, but they've never been to Abbey Road. When I returned a year later, their names were gone. Obviously, someone must come along every so often to give things a fresh coat of paint. Okay, well, we've nearly reached the end of the Abbey Road footage here, believe it or not. There isn't much. As a Beatles fan, as a fan of classic rock pop music more generally, it was such a thrill, both summers, to see the outside of this studio. And I just, on an Elton-specific note, I still find it kind of strange that Elton John, who is one of England's most famous and successful, critically and commercially successful, popular musicians, has never recorded a full album at what is England's most famous recording studio. Well, to be fair, more accurately, Elton did record an album here with a group called the Bread and Beer Band, but it was that was before he was famous. And even more strange, I think, is that to this day that album remains unreleased. Okay, so I also wanted to share with you some of the photos I took that summer of sites around London that relate a bit more directly to Elton John. And this is just a sampling. I have many more photos than what I'm about to show you here, but I will down the line make dedicated videos for these and other sites, and I'll show those other photos at that time. Anyway, we're back here at Charing Cross, Leicester Square, which is not too far away from Denmark Street, so let's go there first. And this is Denmark Street, and when I visited here, I hadn't really done my homework, so I didn't know exactly where anything was. For example, I didn't know where Mills Music had once been. I saw Regent Sound Studios and happened to take a photo of that, but I didn't know back then that this was where Elton had recorded his audition tape for Liberty Records. It was the time he sang all those Jim Reeves songs. But Denmark Street was London's Tin Pan Alley, and it was here that Elton got his first real job in the music business, which was working as a tea-boy at Mills Music, and Mills Music is long gone. Something I didn't realize at the time was that Dick James's original offices were located on the corner, the southeast corner of Denmark and Charing Cross. I just happened to take photos of that block, so if I've done my homework correctly, it would have been somewhere about here. Dick James didn't move to New Oxford Street until about the mid-1960s, and that's where we're headed next. This is 7175 New Oxford Street. Beautiful building. In its days before Dick James moved in, it served as the headquarters of the Pears Soap Company. By the time DJM moved in, and they occupied the second and third floors, there was a bank on the ground floor. The Tumbleweed Connection band photos were taken on the roof of this building, incidentally. And it was here that Elton recorded nearly all his early demos, his first singles, and his first released album, Empty Sky, all done here at the Dick James studio. Now, the day I bought my original 1969 UK Philips Lady Samantha, I made a little pilgrimage to this building because this is where that single was recorded. Now, moving on to Soho, you'll remember that shot of a store called Musicland that was included in the Captain Fantastic scrapbook. Well, here it is in 2015. That's 44 Barrack Street, which, incidentally, if you're an Oasis fan, you might recognize. You can see this address from another angle on the back of Oasis's What's the Story Morning Glory album. Musicland was a Soho music store. It specialized in import vinyl, and in the late 60s, Elton was a loyal customer and would hang out here a lot. You can read in his journals from that period just how regularly he'd visit Musicland. And the copy of the Captain Fantastic scrapbook that you see me holding in some of these photos was actually from my mother's copy of the album she bought in early college, which then later on became my first vinyl copy, my childhood copy. And so I brought both the lyrics and the scrap booklets from that copy with me that summer because I was determined to find some of these locations. And of all Captain Fantastic related locations, for me, the ultimate was Elton and Bernie's former flat up in Islington on Furlong Road. Just a bit of personal background, I saw London for the first time the summer that I was 10, almost 11. And one of the first things my family did when we arrived was a bus tour of the city. Yeah, I was a bad dresser even then. And I really had no idea back then just how big London really was. The only big city that I knew as a kid was Montreal. And so we took this bus tour, and I kept standing up on the top of the bus. I was looking for this door. I was convinced that, as the bus went around the heart of the city, that I'd be able to spot this door. And my mom was sitting right next to me, and she kept telling me to sit down because standing up on the top of an open bus was kind of dangerous. And she finally asked me, she's like, "Matt, what are you looking for? What's going on?" And I told her, I'm like, Mom, this Elton and Bernie's apartment, there's the picture of the door and the Captain Fantastic booklet. And my mom, she couldn't believe it. She just said, "Matt, London is humongous. That door could be anywhere. I don't think you're going to just find it. One day when you're older, maybe you'll come here on your own and you can look for it then." And she wasn't wrong. It took me nearly 25 years to find the opportunity, but I made it back to London, and that's exactly what I did. And I found it. If you're familiar with the events that inspired Elton and Bernie's 1975 #1 hit, "Someone Saved My Life Tonight," then you'll know the significance of this address, which was where Elton and Bernie lived, along with Elton's then-fiancée, Linda, for a while in 1970. And the door is the same. It's the same door, right down to the doorknob. And it was such a thrill to stand here and see it in person. It looks like the current occupants got some pizza coupons or something. I don't know. So anyway, those were just a few Elton-related sites. There'll be more in coming videos. For example, the row house where Elton was born in 1947. Some of the places he lived before he was famous, some of the clubs he played. I won't get around to making those videos for a while, but they're on my content calendar, so you will see them at some point. And until then, thank you for watching. If you like this video, please click like, and if you haven't subscribed to my channel already, please consider subscribing. I have a number of videos I'm working on, and I hope to upload them before the end of the year. I promise they will be great. Stay tuned.